Hello, and welcome to the Hero Report podcast. My name is Ari Cohen. I am a professor of political science at the University of Nebraska. And with me is Matt Langdon of the Hero Construction Company and most recently the Hero Roundtable Conference. How are you, Matt?
I'm just about over jet lag, so I'm doing pretty well.
Wonderful. For those who haven't been following Matt's exploits, Matt used to live in sunny Michigan. He was just in Michigan, and now he's back in Australia, where he's been living for some time. His move to Australia has, of course, resulted in our sort of extended hiatus because we've had trouble finding a good time to chat. But here we are. Maybe this will be a good time to chat from now on. We'll find out. At the very least, it's a good time to chat today. It's my Wednesday, but not yours. Right, Matt?
No, Thursday morning here at 7 a.m.
Great. Well, how's my evening going to be then?
Well, I don't want to tell you too much.
All right, that joke never gets old for me. It never gets old. Well, look, I wanted to start by telling people who might be listening or watching that they missed one impressive conference that you threw together along with your partner in crime, Adam Hartley, also from Michigan, but who stays in Michigan. It was about a day and a half of really exciting lectures by a wide variety of speakers, along with some kind of I don't know what we'll call them, keynote interviews or discussions with such eminent people as Daniel Ellsberg and Philip Zimbardo. Really, it was a very, very impressive event. It was only the second year. I think we talked a lot about the first year's conference last year, but maybe we'll talk for just a minute about this because you should be congratulated for this great event.
Well, thank you very much. It was. I think it built on last year quite effectively, and I was one of the things I was pleased to hear was reports from speakers who said that they were surprised by it, not necessarily the quality of it, but the experience of it. That they were reminded why they do what they do and things like that, which I think is pretty cool. You know, a number of them said that they don't usually participate in the whole thing, and when they go to conferences, they do their talk and then they disappear back to their hotel. And at this one, they didn't do that. So I think that's great. Part of it maybe they didn't have any transport to get back to their hotel, but hopefully it was content.
Yeah, no, I mean I think that's true of both years of this conference, right? That the speakers, the talent that you brought in, didn't stay backstage in the green room, didn't retreat after giving their own talk, but instead they became a part of the audience and they interacted with one another really quite extensively over the course of the 2 days. And for me, that's really the best part. I mean, it's fun to see. I mean, you look out there and see 700 or 800 people who've come to hear these talks. That's exciting, of course. But there's something for me that's really energizing about meeting these people, hearing what they have to say, whether it's a personal story of something that they are doing or have done, or whether it's kind of a more theoretical idea or concept that they're promoting related to altruism or heroism. For me, I think that's really one of the big selling points. It's great for the audience to hear these short talks, but it's really great for these speakers to connect with one another. And so for the second year in a row, that's been, for me, the most exciting part.
Yeah, well, and that was the initial intent, was to get people that are talking and thinking about heroism together, because they don't tend to. So yeah, I think that's a huge part for me too, obviously.
Yeah. And, you know, last year, what, about 350, 400 people? This year, somewhere around 800 people.
Yep.
Next year, I assume you're shooting to at least double up again.
We certainly are. Yeah. I think Yeah, we definitely are. We want a lot of people, from all over the world, but also locally as well around Flint and mid Michigan.
Yeah. So, I have to say too, because this seems a little odd to people when I talk about it. I mean, I'm from Michigan. You lived in Michigan for quite some time, but there's a little bit of a people are very surprised when I say, oh yes, I went to this conference in Flint. And I spent 3 days or whatever in Flint with a bunch of people talking about heroism. But maybe you could just say something about what's going on in Flint, because I think most people who will see this or hear about it will find perhaps a bit that it's a bit unusual that all of this is happening in Flint, Michigan.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a few things. I think in the US, there's a lot of these industrial towns that are being reinvigorated in different ways, and in the last few years, there's definitely been a group of people in Flint trying to re-energize the city with bringing businesses downtown. There's some relatively sophisticated restaurants and bars and brewing places, coming up downtown. They just opened a new farmers market there, which could be in any city in the country. It's a really impressive piece. And then there's people just trying to make create attitude change, I think. And so a group of people got together to start a non-profit to make Flint Hero Town USA, and they're kicking that off using Phil Zimbardo's Heroic Imagination Project curriculum. So a couple of pieces on bystander behavior and mindset. So one of those trainings has been run already. There's another one going on in a couple of weeks that I'll be part of. So there's a real interest in this concept, and I think I'm pretty proud to have been provided the rallying call to that. I think with the quote that came off the top of my head in an interview once about the opposite of a hero being not a villain but a bystander, and people have really grabbed onto that because that's what they see happening in Flint and certainly places all over the world where there's this sort of apathy and people just stand by and decry the problems of the city that they live in or near without actually doing anything to make the change. So that is pretty evident in Flint at the moment. It was evident in Budapest a couple of months ago when I was there. People are understanding that they need to be part of the solution rather than hoping someone's going to run in and make the change for them.
Yeah, it's like that quote that people love to put on their Tumblr blogs or whatever, but that people love to say things like, be the change you want to see in the world, right? But it's so much easier to just quote that and so much harder to do something.
Right.
And the thing that I like about what the Hero Roundtable is doing and what I think we've tried to do over the years on this podcast as well is to talk about what it actually might mean or what it might be like to do something, what heroism might entail, and to get people thinking in sort of concrete ways about heroism, about their actions, about how to prepare themselves to do something when the time for action arises, because as you say, there's this apathy. It's so much easier to kind of stay in your lane, right? And in some sense, what so many of the speakers talked about that the other weekend was precisely this: getting out of your lane, getting out of your comfort zone, and making a mark, doing something, taking an action. So really, I think there's something so valuable in what's going on here, and my hope is that this Hero Town USA and the Heroic Imagination Project, I hope it takes off. I think there's a lot of real potential here, and it would be fascinating to see Flint, as the kind of spearhead here, given, if people think about Flint at all, what they think about is a kind of crime-ridden, a blighted, Rust Belt city along the lines of, Detroit or whatever, right? The usual Michigan story where there's a lot of urban poverty, no jobs, no education or training. So to have the opposite, as the sort of feature of Flint, I think would be very, very exciting.
Yeah, definitely. And I can tell you the people of Flint are very appreciative of Michael Moore creating that image of Flint for the rest of the world.
Well, so I mean, maybe we'll talk about this for a minute, right? Because I'm a native Michigander, and I know that there is some resistance to Michael Moore and to his films and so on, especially in Flint. But I hesitate to say that Michael Moore painted this picture of Flint for the rest of the world or whatever, right? I mean, it's not as if there was the opposite was true, right? That Flint really was a shining gem of a city with all sorts of good things going on, and he turned up and just filmed the 2 blocks that weren't very nice, right? I mean, I think what he wanted to do, whether this worked out or it didn't work out, was that he wanted to raise awareness to kind of the plight of what went on in Flint. Now, whether he stuck to that or whether he tried it for a minute and then moved on to the next thing, there's plenty to criticize there. But I go back to Roger and Me at the beginning of it all, and I see Michael Moore wanting to show people around the country that there were all these people in Flint who wanted to work hard, right? They wanted jobs. They wanted to participate in the electoral process. They wanted agency, and it was, through the work of a handful of people, who were out for their own gain and for profit, that people in Flint were kind of, left behind.
Yeah, I think there's 2 parts to the resentment. One is that he hasn't seemed to have contributed in any way to help Flint financially or with his fame. And the other is that the film is static. It doesn't change as Flint changes. And so people watch it today resenting the image that's being presented because they're reflecting on today's Flint rather than 20 years ago Flint, or even more. Is it? I can't remember when it was made. Late 80s. So, I mean, I spent 20 years in and around Flint and saw massive change. So, maybe people that are local to Flint have grown up there their entire lives don't have the same frame of reference that I do because I came there fresh from from somewhere else. So I think that's where it comes from, is that Roger and Me doesn't reflect Flint now, but people can still watch it on Netflix and say, "Oh, that's Flint."
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'll hold him accountable for the first part that you mentioned, but not for that part, right?
Right.
A documentary is set in the time that it's set in, and maybe he can make a new one about the Hero Town, USA. He can sort of talk about what's going on now. We should invite him back to.
Right, as long as we confiscate all the pitchforks in town first.
Yeah, no, that's true. Look, I want to jump away from Flint for a minute, but talk along the same lines that we're talking about a minute ago. About this sort of apathy and people sort of thinking kind of nebulously about change and about what they can do or can't do, people's agency or bystander behavior and so on. Because I was thinking when I was on my way home from the conference about heroes, and I got back and I'm teaching a class right now that has heroism as one of its sort of central themes. And I asked my students in the class, I said, who are your heroes, right? And I made it sort of even more pointed, right? Because I was thinking about next year's conference. having just had the opportunity this year to, sit down and talk with Dan Ellsberg, right? I got to sort of ask him the kinds of questions about whistleblowing that, I mean, anybody who cares about these topics, to be able to sit down and talk to Dan Ellsberg about them is obviously huge. So I kind of posed this question to 30 students, and I said, if you could just tell me who your hero is, and I could make it so that you could sit down and meet that person, talk with that person, who would you say your hero is, right? So that I could make that happen for you. And nobody responded. And I asked again in a blog post, right? That I don't know, hundreds of people read, and nobody responded. And I thought this was this really was an interesting puzzle for us to think about, right? Why no response? And then, like, the couple responses that trickled in after I made fun of my students for not responding were all people who, I couldn't get them to meet, right? Because they were dead, or they were fictional, or whatever, right? Who is it? And I thought to myself, well, maybe it's just the case that this generation doesn't have any heroes. Maybe all the heroes are old people. They're all dying, or they've died, and that I think presents us with something of a puzzle and something of a problem. So I thought I would throw it out to you and see what your reactions are.
Well, I think I agree. I think that today there seems to be almost a reluctance to suggest that you have a hero. I've asked people that question, obviously, a lot over the last 8 years, and am surprised by the number of people who say they don't have a hero. Because I think it's a very powerful question to ask somebody, who is your hero, because it tells you so much about them. And I think the non-answer tells you a lot about them as well. I think there's an issue in today's world of this, and we've talked about this before, of our access to all parts of famous people's lives that expose human things about them. And I think even, well, certainly 100 years ago, World War I started, and the heroes of people at that time were world changers, and they were explorers, or they were warriors, or they were people doing these sort of amazing things, and there was no access to their private life. It was, you were seeing film reels on them or reading about them. So that's part of it, I think, and part of it, I wonder, is that struggles don't seem to be so important to us anymore. There's so much happening on 24-hour cable news that individuals are often not attributed to the events. So I think that we're overwhelmed by all the things that are happening in the world now, and it's harder to make sense of what the serious ones are. The number of people that have been calling ISIS the most dangerous group ever in existence is fascinating to me. I mean, that describes our news bite life that we live in now. So I think there's a lot in that, but I think that's a lot of what's contributing to this lack of having heroes.
Yeah. So part of it is everything's coming at us too fast and too much, and we don't spend enough time on any one thing, right? So that whatever is happening in the moment, that's the thing that we think the most about or care the most about, and then it's gone the next day. And we have too much access, so we know all the, anytime there's someone who appears to be a good potential candidate for heroism, We find out all the things that are not so great about that person almost immediately. Okay, so all of that is fine. I have a third maybe, which is that people do have heroes, but they're embarrassed to talk about it. That if, I don't know if it's that they're embarrassed that they might be told that they're wrong, that person is not in fact a good hero, or if they're just embarrassed to share something that they view as very private about themselves, right? Because someone might ask them, why is that person a hero?
Right.
I do think also that we have this problem where people think that, and we've talked about this in the past, maybe it's worth talking about a little bit more for just a few minutes. People think that for someone to be a hero, they have to be perfect, right? That you have to always be a hero and always have been a hero in order to be judged a proper candidate for someone's hero. So I was talking to somebody, one of my students, and I suggested some names, right? And I went with names that I thought were obviously, I said Nelson Mandela, right? Because it just seemed so obvious. And the person was like, oh, well, I don't know that Nelson Mandela was a hero, right? He had all these problems in his family life and so on. And I said, well, but everything that he did, right? I mean, he was in prison for decades because he was struggling for equality for Black South Africans. And
well, I think that's the social media world that we live in, that people see an opportunity to present themselves as smarter than everybody else. And we saw that when Mandela died. All of these people posting the truth about Nelson Mandela, and we live with that. I think we have the internet has provided a platform for people to present themselves as smarter, as knowing more than you do, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. They'll just bring something up to show that they know more than you do.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, yeah. So that's terrifying. Number one. But it also, I mean, I was thinking about this, right? And even when I say someone like Mandela or Desmond Tutu, right, who I thought everybody would agree, these are also, I mean, Mandela has just passed away. Tutu is in his 80s. Dan Ellsberg, who I've been mentioning now a couple times in this episode, is in his 80s. These are Are there no heroes who are younger people? Why is it that when we think of heroes, they have to be sort of these people in sort of the twilight years who then we look back and say, on balance, their whole life was heroic more than it was not heroic. Why is no one willing to pick someone younger who has done a variety of heroic things? Is it because they might still yet do things that are shameful?
Well, I think it's down to this this two-sided world that we live in now. Every side has to have equal weighting. It's the same reason that people are arguing that climate change doesn't exist. I mean, they're given fair weight by news media. So if you, I mean, Edward Snowden is today's example, right? But we had a debate at the conference on that, and there's huge support for him being a traitor. But if you were to take him away from all the context and all of the reporting and just present his story as something that happened 100 years ago, I think you would see people suggesting that he was a hero. I think the reason that Mandela and Tutu and Ellsberg are presented as heroes is because history has proved them to be heroes. We would have had the same argument about Ellsberg when he released the Pentagon Papers. I mean, we did have the same argument.
Sure.
And Mandela as well. I mean,
yes, no, that's right. I mean, Ellsberg. Yeah. Ellsberg in the 70s, Mandela. Sure, right? Okay. But what does that mean for us? as people who care about heroism and who want to curate like a conference on heroism or a discussion, an international discussion on heroism, who do we point to, right? If I'm going to tell my students you should have some heroes, who's on the list? Who can I give them? And say, this is someone who should be your hero. You should want to meet this person.
Right. Well, I think there's the different categories of heroes that we've talked about before as well. We nearly had a subway rescuer this year at the conference. He would be unequivocally described as a hero, right? There's no one who would say, well, he's an actor, so he's probably not the right kind of person. I mean, that's probably not going to happen.
I had more than one student write about Wesley Autry already this semester that he is not a hero.
Amazing.
That's right.
Can you? That just ended the conversation. How on earth is that justified?
Gosh, let me see. Keep talking, and I'll see if I can find it.
Okay. So I think there are other people, and I want to talk about CNN heroes again for our regular bashing of CNN heroes. But I think there's an element that they've caught onto here is that people, and this is linked back to what we were talking about before, people are impressed by someone who dedicates their life to a cause. And I think that is related to what we were saying about things just happening all the time. We can't keep our focus on one thing. There's protests going on in Hong Kong right now, and how many people are, what percentage of people are going to hold on to that issue and keep watching it after the news cycle has gone through? Independence in China is going to be, or freedom in China is going to be an issue for a small number of people long term. But right now, I saw a bunch of stories yesterday about the 17-year-old that is spearheading this stuff. And so a lot of people would say, okay, he's a hero right now, but in 2 weeks' time, no one's going to remember him. Or very, very few people are going to remember him. So I think there's something to this CNN sort of descent into everyday altruism. I understand why it's happening, because I do think that people really are amazed by individuals who dedicate their lives to a cause. And we've talked about this before. These are good people doing good things, but it's really watering down the idea of heroism.
Yeah. I'm emailing you 3 separate blog posts about Wesley Autry not being a hero. Okay.
Have you got any summary? Is it because...
Because it's just one action.
Okay.
Right? So he did one thing that is unquestionably heroic, right? So what they're asking, and it's not a bad question, right? I framed it as though it was some sort of crazy thing to do or say, but what they're asking is whether there's a difference between doing something heroic and being a hero. And it's something that I think we've talked a bit about, right? I mean, Wesley Autry might not be universally a hero, despite having done the heroic thing of jumping onto subway tracks in front of an oncoming train and saving someone's life, right? Laying on top of the person, and the train passed over the both of them. I mean, that's a one-time thing. He was... unquestionably it's a heroic thing to do. Most people wouldn't do it. It's extraordinary. But, the rest of his life may not involve any heroic behavior again. So is he a hero, or is he just someone who did one heroic thing?
Right. And so, I mean, I would say, what's the difference? I mean, I think there's... he's a hero because he did something heroic. I mean, that's... When you get into the linguistics of it, I think that's what it is. But I think people get confused with, again, it's going back to this sort of centuries-old definition of someone who's a world changer, who's and some of this is what Phil Zimbardo has been focusing on is that anyone has the potential to be heroic, that it's not some special gene. And I think 100 years ago, people thought that you were born to heroism, that, following Edmund Hillary, the exploits of Edmund Hillary, that's a hero. That's someone who...
Well, this goes all the way back to my book, Matt, right? I mean, Achilles was a hero because that was his race, right? I mean, he was part mortal and part divine, and in that sense, right, he was a hero. There was a race of heroes who were, who had divine, partially divine parentage, and I mean, there's still something about that there's like a vestige of that, I think, in the way that we talk about these things, right? That Achilles does these great deeds because he's a hero, right? His heroics exist because of who he is. It's not the other way around, right?
Right.
It's the generation after Achilles where we start getting the kind of everyman hero, right? That, when this race of partially divine people dies out, it's the next group who have to they have to be heroes. They have to gain some kind of glory on their own merits, right? It's the things that they do that create a glorious name for themselves, rather than who they are.
Yeah. Well, and I think we have to go back to this difference in question of who is a hero and who is your hero, because that use of the word, and Scott Ellison saw this in his research, that use of the word your really opens up the definition for people, and it starts becoming someone that you admire. And I think, I ask this question to thousands of people, usually kids, and there are three sort of different types of answers. One is the family member. My parents are my heroes because they feed me. And then there's my hero is the quarterback of U of M because I want to be a quarterback when I grow up. And then there's the Amelia Earhart is my hero, and that's where it starts. That's the kind of answer we're looking for when we ask that question,
right.
And it's because of the attributes of that hero, right? Or their story, that there's something about what they did and how they did it that we want to emulate. So it's, when you ask the question, you kind of have to qualify it in some ways. And I think today the most common, among adults, I think the most common interpretation of who is your hero is who is the person in the field that you're interested in that you most want to be like, or most inspires you to do better at your job or at your passion, or whatever it is. So Lance Armstrong is your hero because you ride bikes, or so on. I think that's the part that we need to take away when we ask the question. So we don't want to, when I ask who is your hero and who do you want to meet, I don't mean who is the person that best represents your interests, or who is someone that, the question we want to ask is, who is someone whose exploits and character are admirable to you?
That's right. Name some people who are better than you.
Well, you get a lot of people who wouldn't give you an answer to that either.
Yeah, but I mean, in some sense, that's sort of the way that we're trying to think about this. And look, that's a tough question, isn't it? But I mean, who are these people, right? I mean, don't you have a comprehensive list going? Don't you have like a deck of playing cards?
Yeah. I mean, there are, but even that, the qualification is different. I mean, we've got people like Wesley Autry in this list, but also people like Edmund Hillary, and also kids who have made change just in their world, or there's just lots of. It's very difficult to create a list. Well, It's not that difficult. Jensen Kyle did it. I mean, his website, Moral Heroes, that's what he's talking about, is moral heroes. Wesley Autry's not in his list.
Right.
Lance Armstrong is not in his list. It's people who have shown moral courage, not physical courage.
Yeah.
But his list, as far as I know, I mean, he could tell us better, but it's not widely known. It's not widely used in classrooms or wherever. And I think that goes back to that CNN thing. Is maybe it's people, find it difficult to relate to these people, so they're hands-off-ish. I think I keep using Edmund Hillary as an example, but I think young boys growing up wanted to be Edmund Hillary and imagined themselves being Edmund Hillary. And I think Jane Goodall had that sort of upbringing. She wanted to change the world. She wanted to be someone amazing. And I think today it seems that that's less common. That we're not encouraged to want to be someone who changes. So few people get to be in that position. So it's sort of like don't be silly. I want to be an astronaut. Well, you're not going to be an astronaut, so what's your second choice? It's, right. So I want to be Edward Snowden. Well, you're not going to be Edward Snowden. What's your second choice? Right. I think there's some of that, and that goes back to your point about being embarrassed to share who your hero is, because if your life isn't matching up to their exploits, why not? What are you doing wrong?
Yeah, I think that's certainly part of it, and maybe that's why it's easier to find people who are in their 80s, right? They've had a lot longer to work on this or whatever. But I'm always surprised, right? I'm so surprised when no one says, like, immediately, oh, it's Aung San Suu Kyi.
Right.
Right. Immediately, like that. Oh, that's who it is. Right. But why is that? Right. That's not a hard. That's not so hard. I mean, obviously, you have to know something about Burma. You have to care about human rights. But it seems to me that that's someone who has done remarkable things, but whose life is not so out of bounds that we say to ourselves, facing similar circumstances, I could never act that way.
Yeah, well, I think another part of this is, how do you find out about these people? I mean, how does the average person in the US find out about Aung San Suu Kyi? And I think there was some sort of loosely put together campaign a couple of years ago to get her freed, where I remember Jim Carrey recorded a video, and there were some other people, but that's the gap here, is the communication piece. So it used to be that Bono could tell us who we should be paying attention to in the world, and he had a big audience that he could say, you need to look at what's happening over here. But now, no one wants to hear what Bono's got to say, because he just put his music on our iPods without our permission. But who? Because CNN's certainly not telling us. None of the news channels are telling us about people doing heroic stuff in the world. So how do we find this out? It used to be you would go to the movies and see a newsreel, or you'd be reading books. I've got a friend who has been following my work in this for the whole time, and for at least 5 of the 8 years had no idea what it was that I was doing, but supported it anyway. But she only reads biographies, so that's the only type of book she reads, and she has got no heroes. And I just find that fascinating, and I tried to get it out of her as to what it was about biographies that she enjoyed reading, and how is it that no one whose story she'd read became someone that she could consider her hero. But there was no answer. So it's a pretty deep question. I think there's a lot of factors going into this.
Yeah, for me it's a big concern, right? I mean, I feel like we're missing something here, and if we're talking about why people are apathetic, I mean, part of it is not having the right role models, right? Or the right life stories to try to emulate, or however we want to cast this, right? If you, I mean, if you don't have any heroes, or if you're afraid to say that you do, I mean, it's not surprising then that you're not going to do much
Right.
yourself. So I think there's a big barrier to entry here when we think about heroic behavior. If people don't have heroes themselves, or don't want to think about or talk about their heroes, that's maybe why we find ourselves in the kind of situation we find ourselves in when it comes to deeply altruistic behavior, or heroic sacrifice, or what have you. Yeah.
I wonder. I don't know how many regular viewers we have. Certainly, probably less than we used to, as we haven't done anything for many months. But it'd be interesting to get, because Google Hangout can bring another 8 people on. It would be interesting to have an episode where 8 people came on and told us who their heroes were. I think that could be a very, very informative episode for people, and certainly would help us start to understand what people are looking for. I think one of the things that we have to do, and I had said to you on Twitter that this is our mission, is to try to fix this issue. One of the things has to be sharing those stories, and how do we do that? And I think there's an avenue here, and a friend of mine had suggested this numerous times, of creating a viral website with these stories of heroism. And I in the last since the conference, I've been thinking more about taking up blogging again, because it seems that people are sharing stuff much more than they used to. Facebook has exponentially grown the number of links. I'm sure, like, people like sharing blog posts, where it's been 3 years, I think, since I was regularly blogging. That certainly wasn't the case back then. So maybe it's time for us to create a portal that we are posting these stories on a regular basis with a regular format, a standard format that the story fits each time. There's a photo and a video if it's available, and highlighting the text from the news report, or whatever it might be. There needs to be a way of delivering these stories to people, because it's not being done by anybody else.
Yeah, I agree. I think the time may be approaching for that. The time might even be right now for it, since you've got nothing but time on your hands to get to this project, to start collecting, curating, putting all these things out there. But I do think there's something really important about this. I mean, when people ask you about your heroes, what do you tell them?
Well, I've got a few. I mean, and it's interesting, because it certainly does depend on the story, I think, and the impact that the story has when I first hear it. So Aung San Suu Kyi is definitely one of them. And it's one part of her story, and it was that she was given the opportunity to leave to go to her husband's funeral, and she said no, because she knew she'd never be allowed back in her country again, and everything would have been for naught.
Yep.
And so that's the kernel of that story. And I think Irina Sendler was another one who, the fact that she kept going back in to rescue these kids from the ghetto, just that repetition, that taking that risk every day, was the part of her story. And I guess I should show my book, shouldn't I? That's sitting right here. But the whole this is unplanned. But this is what this book is about. The Hero Field Guide is to provide some of these heroes, and there's Irina Sendler, for kids that haven't got them. There's no book like that in the market for middle school kids to be able to read about people who did amazing things. And that's what I try to condense their story into the the important pieces. So, we had Bayard Rustin on the cover, and he did so much, but I tried to make it the most, I guess the parts that spoke to me about why this guy is a hero. So if people want to buy that book, it's called The Hero Field Guide. It's available on Amazon, and I'm really proud.
We'll link to it, of course.
What's that?
I said we'll link to it, of course.
Right. But I think that's a nice thing to have, and I'm really proud that I've got it, and that my daughter will be able to read it. And she's already we've read it going to bed. But I think to get a bigger audience, it does need to be on the internet in some way. But it does need to be fresh. It needs to be, this is what happened today, so that you can be the first one to show your friends on Facebook that you saw this story today. Because writing these profiles of heroes of the past is not as not as exciting for people to share.
No, that's right. I mean, there really has to be some work done here to find contemporary stories of heroism, because I mean, without it, what we're talking about are people who are not around anymore and who have achieved some an almost mythic status, right? I mean, think about Martin Luther King at this point, right? I mean, it's more of a sort of mythology than anything else by now. That's not to say that it's not worth discussing. I mean, his life obviously very much is, and the sacrifices that he made, and all the risks that he took, and all of the good work that he did. But when someone has a federal holiday, it's a kind of outsized life that people feel is just not something they can do, right? So in many ways, finding people who are doing things now, who are in their 30s or their 50s, right? People who you could see, who are still out there and acting. I think it's very, very important, and I think there's also something really important to be said for putting these names out there who might not be household names, because what you're doing then is combating the idea that the superstar, celebrity, whatever, is an appropriate hero, right? That achieving some measure of fame equates with being a good version of a hero, or someone who we should try, whose actions we should try to emulate. I think that it's very, very important to kind of combat that way of thinking, right? That the LeBron James is a hero because he plays in my town, or he's the best player. There's nothing heroic there, right? It's someone. Yes. It's someone who does something impressive, who you like, who has accomplished something you wish you could accomplish, or who you just enjoy watching play sports. But none of that is heroic, and combating that, I think, is a virtue in and of itself.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think that providing alternatives to these mythologized heroes like Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks is really important too. I have often encouraged teachers to find other black heroes for Black History Month, because kids at some point they completely tune out Martin Luther King, and I think that's very sad too. I think people don't really know a lot of his story, because it's just the cherry-picked pieces and the quotes, and I think the guy changed, and I think that's an important piece. He didn't start out as a non-violent protester, and same with Nelson Mandela. I think the fact that these people changed is really important. That they weren't born a hero, that they educated themselves and changed their approaches, and that's why I get mocked for this a lot. But I like having Angelina Jolie as a hero for this sort of thing, because she changed. She certainly didn't have to, but she was a brat, the brat of Hollywood for a number of years, and then had a transformative experience and completely changed her life, and has brought a lot of good to the world because of that. Sure, it's easy for her to jet around to places and whatever, but she certainly doesn't have to, and I think that's really admirable and a story worth telling.
Yep. Well, so it sounds like you've got your marching orders now, Matt. We'll look forward to your return to blogging, and you'll start giving us these, maybe in some sense they're, some of them may be unsung heroes, right? People who are doing great things that not enough people know about. People who, they might take off once you start to shine the light on what they're doing. At the very least, you'll give my students who are apparently don't have any heroes, give them a good list that they can start to choose from.
Maybe you should put my book on the reading list for your class from now on.
I probably should.
Then they have no reason.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, Matt, this was a good return for us. We're a little bit rusty after so long away, but I'm sure iTunes will be happy to see us back. I encourage everybody who's listening to tell your friends that they should listen as well. And of course, I hope that you'll send us Matt and I a note. Sorry, Matt and me a note about who your heroes are. Send a tweet, send an email, comment on this when it goes up on the website, and let us know really who are your heroes, because maybe we're wrong. Maybe you all have great heroes. In which case, Matt can go back to not blogging and not worry about it.
It'll be very interesting to see if there's a difference with people commenting on Facebook than being asked in person. But then again, I know you asked the question on Twitter, so maybe there won't be a difference. But we'll certainly ask the question.
Yeah, no, it's worth looking into, because my suspicion is people don't think about heroism the right way, and as a result, they're either embarrassed or they don't have any heroes that they could talk about in any meaningful way. So I look forward to continuing the conversation. I hope we'll be able to get a regular time going here again, so we can have these sorts of discussions again. Start bringing on guests as we have in the past. Well, this was fun. Glad that we got started again.
It was. I definitely missed it. It's good to be able to do this, and I think it just comes with me needing to commit to getting up and ready at 7 a.m., which is not my normal time, but we can certainly do it.
There you have it. Well, everyone, Matt is making sacrifices for you, so we'll add him. He can be #1 on the blog of heroes. The sacrifice of waking up and being properly dressed and ready to have a conversation at 7 o'clock in the morning, it's really something.
I do what I can.
Thank you. Well, everyone, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Matt, good to talk with you, and we'll see you soon.
You too.